please look on your worksheet 2-7, the pink paper, before problem number 1. This is our pre-image. Would you please copy the domain and the range and the table down on your worksheet? So in problem number 1, what is this 2 out in front going to do to my f of x function? Numbers out in front either make a vertical stretch or shrink. If this number is bigger than 1, it makes a stretch. Numbers out in front that are bigger than 1 make a stretch. If there's a negative sign out in front of it, we're not looking at the negative sign, we're just looking at the number. Now, you can see that I copied this same table that we wrote down above. And the reason I did that is to show you how to make a vertical stretch with a table. The easiest way to make stretches and shrinks are using a table. And so, what does this word say? Is vertical in the x direction or the y direction? So I am going to multiply these y numbers. What? This table is not on your paper. You would have to squeeze it in because I didn't give you very much space for it. You multiply, where did I get the 2? Right there, the 2 in front. You multiply the y numbers by the 2 in front. It says that for you on your beige note paper. If there's a number out in front, you multiply that number out in front times the y values. And so when I do that, the x values are not going to change. And so the y values are going to be -8, -2, -6, -2. And all I have to do is graph the points on my graph paper. Please use your red pencil so that I can know that this is your final answer. But my graph isn't big enough to do graph a -8. But I can estimate the -8, -1, -8 would be approximately right there. 1 and 2, -2, 3 and -6, 5 and -2. Does this look like it's been stretched out? So, the domain and the range are the domain and range of the new graph. And so this would be at -1, 5. The bottom point is at -8 and -2. That would be your domain and your range. The next problem we're going to look at is problem number 2. On problem number 2, what is that 1/2 out in front going to do to our problem? So, this 2, if you have a number out in front, it's going to make either a vertical stretch or shrink. If this number is less than 1, it's going to shrink. Another word for shrink is compression. Left out one of the S's. Compression. Okay, so how do you get this compression? You multiply the y values. You can see that I copied the original table down again, and you multiply the y values by the number out in front. To get either a vertical stretch or a vertical compression, you multiply by the number that is out in front. The number out in front is 1/2. So I'm multiplying all of my y values by 1/2. The x values do not change. 1/2 of -4, 1/2 of -1, 1/2 of -3, 1/2 of -1. This is the points for my new graph. So my points for my new graph are going to be here. That's why it is called a shrink or a compression, because it looks like it is smaller. -1 to +5 is the domain. -2 to -0.5 is my range. Now we're going to do problem number 3. Problem number 3 has several transformations, not just one. We need to start here. You start next to the x. The negative number by the x makes a reflection over what? The 2 out in front. And the -3 at the end. Now, previously, I showed you how to do these step by step on the graph. This time, I'm going to show you step by step using a table. Because when you start getting reflections and stretches, sometimes those in particular are easier to do with a table. Now, on your pink paper, there's not a lot of room for tables, because how many transformations are we making? 3. So I need the original table plus 3 more. So just space-wise, that's going to be hard to fit on the pink paper. This first table is the pre-image. It's what you start with. It is this graph right here goes with this first table. Our first transformation is reflection over what? Y. Now this sometimes is a little bit hard to understand. To make a reflection over y, you multiply the x column by -1. The reason that makes a reflection over y is because the y numbers stay the same. And so the x numbers flip over and the y numbers stay the same. And so this will make a reflection over y. Okay, what do I get if I multiply these by -1? Yes, this one changes to a positive. These all change to negatives. This is the first transformation. You multiply the x column by -1 to get a reflection over y. Okay, our second transformation is a vertical stretch. Vertical is which direction? X or Y? Y. So I'm going to multiply this number by my Y column. So what am I going to get when I do that? My X column is going to stay the same, and negative 4 times 2, and negative 1 times 2, and negative 3 times 2, and negative 1 times 2. This has been stretched. Then I have one more thing to do. Down 3. Is that in the X direction or the Y direction? Down. Down is in the Y direction. So from my Y column, I'm going to subtract 3 from each one of those numbers for my final table. These numbers show all 3 transformations. But I got a problem. I can't graph a negative 11 on this graph paper right here. So what I can do is I can make a pretty good estimate of where the 11 would be. It would be way down here. That is the best I can do for the first point, 1, negative 11. The second point is negative 1, negative 5. The next point also goes off my graph. Negative 3, negative 9 goes off my graph, but not quite as far as the other one. The last point is negative 5 and 1. This has been reflected over the Y. Instead of having this line segment on the left, it's now on the right. It's been stretched out. This has been moved down. The domain and range for this new graph would be negative 5 to 1. And the range would be negative 11 to negative 5. On problems 4, 5, and 6, we are not going to make the graphs, but we are going to write down in words what the transformations will be. So, on problem number 1, what is the x plus 1 going to do to my graph if I did graph out all of it? What is the 1/2 out in front going to do? I should say vertical shrink. What is the minus 2 on the end going to do? Please answer 5 and 6. How did you do on 5 and 6? A lot of times I get questions on problem number 6. Are you looking at problem number 6? On problem number 6, this number out in front is a negative 2. To tell whether or not it is a vertical stretch or a vertical shrink, you do not look at the negative sign. You just look at the 2. The 2 is bigger than 1. That's what makes it a stretch. The negative out in front does not make a stretch or a shrink. It makes a reflection. So that's the one that confuses some people. At this time, would you please complete problems 7 through 10?